Hello, and welcome to Goffstown's Grizzled Grizzlies. Tonight, we're going to do in part 2 of the Great Goffstown Covered Bridge Fire of 1976. And with us, we have our Goffstonian historian, Jim Boschman. And any pictures you see today should be credited to the Goffstown Historical Society. I'm Mike McKinnon.
And I'm Eric Emmerling. They say an arson started it. At least that's how it was reported in the newspapers on August 17th and 18th of 1976 when the newspapers got a hold of this story. But Professor Jim here has got some other ideas about maybe who started the fire, and we've been waiting for a while to hear the result as to who did this. And we're going to hear about it just a little later tonight. But the fire that destroyed the Goffstown Covered Bridge, it was a historic structure that we said before was built in 1901, and it was quite a fire. The intensity of this fire blistered the paint on nearby fire trucks. You could see smoke and flames from downtown Manchester to see this big, huge fire. And the blaze basically destroyed the railroad service beyond Goffstown as a result of that. And we've got some more information that we want to share about that fire.
Jim, could you share with us a story about the saving of the Goffstown Bridge sign, the covered bridge sign?
All right. It's a great story, Mike. And if for those who are watching tonight, you probably remembered walking by that bridge, and there was a beautiful sign on the right side. And that sign just said Goffstown, New Hampshire, and underneath it was the B&M Railroad site number for the bridge. That sign was made and gifted by Henry Hunter, who ran the barber shop in town. And in his spare time, he painted that and felt needed to be identified. So he did that. But the story that I'm going to share about that sign is how it was rescued from the river. And this young man, his name was John Leonard, and he was a clerk. He worked at the counter at Champagne's Market. And today's Sully's, it was Champagne's at the time. And he tells the story. And he wrote the entire experience that day. He wrote it on a 3-page letter, and he sent it to the Goffstown Historical Society 30 years after the fire happened. So he was a grown man when he sent this story, and he wanted to share his experience that day in 1976. And he also, he visited the Historical Society with the letter in hand and his children. And he wanted to show his children how important it was to save a piece of history. And the way it starts in his story, like everybody else, he was mesmerized by what he was seeing. The bridge, the town's bridge was burning up. And he looked and said, what can I do to save something? He knew he couldn't save the bridge, but he looked at the sign and he said, maybe I can save the sign. And he watched and watched, and much to his disbelief, the sign, as the flames were touching it, it dislodged from the front of the trestle and it splashed down into the river. There it was, amongst thousands of other pieces of debris. You can imagine how much stuff was in the water. The whole roof had burned off. I mean, it was debris. It was just, if you could, you would walk across it.
It almost looks like you could walk across it.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the sign was upside down, so it looked like the rest. He couldn't see the writing, so he kept his eye on that sign, and he watched, and he watched, and he walked along the riverbank, and he watched to see exactly where that sign was. Now, as I read his story, I flipping through old pictures that we have at the Historical Society, and lo and behold, I see a picture of John on the shoreline watching the sign. And you will see that picture right there is that's the group. That ended up being his brother and his good friend Chris McLaughlin, who joined in the search party. Why did they join? Because John reminded them we could all be famous for this. And so they were. Front page of the Goffstown News. That was famous if you grew up in Goffstown. Yeah. And so he told them, you got to help me because I'm going to reach a point where I can't watch it anymore. So they joined in much. There's right there, you can see the sign on the front of the train bridge. It's not the greatest picture, but you can see that's where it was. So they watched the sign all the way down to the dam, and it took a good hour before it reached. It may have been 2 hours, he said. And finally, it was time. He sent his brother Doug and his friend Chris McLaughlin down below, and that sign sat on the dam, a beautiful dam. It sat there teetering, and it teetered and teetered for what seemed hours, he said. And finally, another piece, a chunk of the bridge bumped it and pushed it right over the dam. And he could hear them screaming down below, we got it, we got it. And they grabbed that sign and up Mill Street they ran. They were so proud that they had that sign. And as you can well imagine, there were news reporters everywhere. The story had traveled, and there was Goffstown News right there, waiting for that big moment. And so the boys, that's the sign, the picture right there. Well, it's up. I'd like that. That's John to the left. You can see him. He's watching the waters. He's watching that sign as it's floating down. And so now the reporters, everybody's taking pictures and getting the story and their names. And so they were so excited. And by this time now, the crowd had thinned out. Well, those boys headed home. They lived up on Summer Street, I think it was. And they brought the sign home. And they hung it up right in their bedroom. And they were so excited. Well, that night, around 6 o'clock that night, they had a knock at the door. And it was the Goffstown Police Department.
Uh-oh.
And they made the boys aware that sign, that's could be evidence to a crime scene. Because at this point, nobody knew how this fire started. So that was remaining evidence. And so the police took the sign and they brought it to the police station. And they held it there for, I guess it was a few weeks, could have been a month. And then the boys, they were waiting to hear from them to get the sign back. So they went to the police station and said, can we borrow the sign? We're doing an appearance for a interview for another newspaper, and we'd like the sign for the picture. And they gave him so they gave him the sign back. Well, that night the sign went right home again, and they had that sign for another couple of weeks from what they wrote in the story. And finally their dad said, the right thing, that sign needs to go to the Historical Society. That's where it belongs. And here we are 50 years later, and the sign is still at the Historical Society where it was meant to be. Along with, in case you want to come and visit, we have a couple beams from the trestle that were salvaged. We got a track, one of the ties from the tracks, a piece of the rail we've got. So there's a few odds and ends, some bolts and stuff that were salvaged, and they've been preserved at the Historical Society. But it wasn't but, weeks later, or it was a matter of days, I think, and the salvage crews were there because it was a pretty dangerous site. And there was not a lot of investigating to be done. So the mystery of how it started lingered on and lingered on. But that's John Leonard's story. It's on the wall, the entire story. It's on the wall, and you can go to the Historical Society and you can read it there. And it's really it's quite a read. I think I posted it on the site on Facebook. We grew up in Goffstown. Yes. Just put the key in search for the John Leonard story. of the train bridge, and you can read that word for word. But that's what happened that day, and we thank you, John, if you're out there watching this. I've reached out to John a few times. He doesn't live around here, and I've never really heard back from him. But that was a kind gesture he did, and from that day on, and then writing the story, so we have it forever, you know.
I've read the story, and it's very well written. I mean, it goes into details, and you can feel what he was thinking and feeling at the moment. Everything going along. It's I'm impressed. It's
to have a young kid, you know, he's 17 years old, and seeing what's happening, the history that is being lost, and what can I do? And who would think, you know, at that age, the sign, maybe I can. I'm sure if the fire hadn't reached that point, he would have run up and tried to pull it off. That's the energy he had that day. But he did what he could, and even what he did, you think about it, how much debris went over that dam. And never to be seen again, you know.
Could you maybe help some of the viewers here? Let us know the hours and when the Goffstown Historical Society will be open. I think it's got us opening on the 25th of this month.
When things warm up here, it's usually in May, and it'll be Saturdays, every Saturday from May to October. From 12 to 2, all volunteers, so it takes 2 or 3 to be there as volunteers. I'm going to try to get in there a few times this year because it's such an incredible thing they do. A shout out to Jennifer Brown. She's been the president now since 2014. Valerie she's the curator now. Valerie LaJoy. There's a group, Joanne Hawks is instrumental, Barbara Simpson, and it's Valerie Neal, that's her name, and she does so much in bringing the society up to modern times, you know, with the computer. Everything's being processed like the big historical societies are.
I am aware that they have an opening on, I think it's May 14th, and there's a presentation called Redcoats and Rebels. Now, I know you have to reserve. You have to call the library and reserve a seat for it. It doesn't cost anything. But having gone to numerous ones there, they're an actual joy to be part of and to learn from and experience.
There is a beautiful, there's a train room. For those who haven't been to the Historical Society, there's a train room, and it's all, it was a gift from the Carr family to put this addition onto the society building, and it's been labeled as the train room since the day it was built, and there's an exact replica of the train, Goffstown's train that burned down. There's a replica of it, and you know, it's about this big, to scale type thing. So it's there for viewing in the train room, along with a lot of the memorabilia from the train days. So it's a sight to see. Bring the kids in there. All the kids get to control the trains, and there's all volunteers that run the train room. So that's something you got to see. Yeah,
it's cool.
Yeah, no, we think back to this fire, and we're also trying to kind of paint a picture, I think, a little bit about what life was like back then. What was it? I mean, the fire occurred almost a half century ago, you know, and I think controversial issues of today were being argued back then in 1976. For instance, transgender athlete Renee Richards was barred from competing in the U.S. Open that summer. And the American Episcopal Church, they were the first to approve the ordination of women as priests and bishops back then. And in September of this 1976 was the first time women cadets were able to enter the military academies, West Point, the Naval Academy, of those places. But women didn't serve in combat back then, but they were at least now able to graduate from college and become a second lieutenant. The political landscape back in 1976 was dominated by the aftermath of the Watergate fiasco. That scandal fueled a deep public distrust in government and in traditional politicians. So New Hampshire's first in the nation primary in 1976 garnered a lot of national attention. Jimmy Carter secured an unexpected win, and he went on to defeat incumbent President Gerald Ford in the general election. In the New Hampshire primary back in January, Ford beat someone by the name of Ronald Reagan by 1,587 votes. So it was a close elections, both of those in the primaries, and the general election was close. Do you guys remember voting in either the primary or the general election? And if so, who and what really motivated you to vote for that candidate?
I do remember voting. It was actually my second presidential election to vote for. I voted in 1972 was my first presidential election. And I would be somewhere around 23 years old, 24. And that time in life, one is just learning about things. Yeah, you've gone to school and so forth, but I think we continually evolve as a person and grow. And back then, I think when I was voting, I just flipped a coin rhetorically, and I ended up voting for Gerald Ford. I can't give you a good reason why. I don't remember. It was just something said vote for Ford, and that's a terrible reason to vote for someone, but I again was considered very young, and it was at a time when things were really interesting. Like you mentioned, you had Watergate. You had a president a couple years prior resigning because of the Watergate controversy. You had even before that his vice president, Spiro Agnew, resigned because of some supposed illegal activities. So as a bit of trivia, when Gerald Ford was president, it was the only time in United States history that neither the president nor the vice president were elected by the people. Because Ford was appointed vice president after Agnew resigned, and then he took over the presidency when Nixon resigned, and they appointed Nelson Rockefeller as the vice president after all that. So I've never been asked that in a trivia quiz, but I know the answer to that. I think also because of the Vietnam War having ended, and there were a lot of protests in the late 60s, early 70s, kind of like the protests going on today in some respects. It was about the Vietnam War and the administration at the time. And I think it was a challenging year to be an incumbent. And that's what I remember back then. And asking that question was actually really challenging because when you think about it, my brain is kind of like, has a memory chip of a Commodore 64. So you're lucky I can tell you what I had for breakfast, let alone who I voted for.
You know, I don't, you know, what was on my mind? I mean, I'm 18 years old at the time, and all I can tell you is when I was working at Goffstown Auto Parts, and that was connected to Johnny's Tire and Battery. And one day, the big Winnebago pulled in, and it was Harris for president. And he gave me a coffee cup. Got my vote. So that's about all I can tell you on that. So that's all it took to draw me in. So, but at that age, you know, like Mike says, you know, our minds aren't quite, you know, geared up and ready to make that kind of.
I don't think most people have experienced enough of life to develop an understanding, or it's a learning process.
Yeah,
I've always felt life is a learning process, a growing process.
Let's see. This was the first presidential election I was able to vote in because I didn't turn 18 until '73, so I missed the '72 presidential election. And back at the time, my main political goal was to have the FBI create a file for me. That was a goal, was to be, was to somehow be some kind of a protester of enough wherewithal that I'd have an FBI file. And and I knew that ways to go about doing it if you wrote letters to your congressman, and if you were subscribed to certain newspapers and magazines. So I purposely subscribed to the Socialist Workers' Party monthly newsletter, so the FBI might hear about it. And I ended up voting, as a matter of fact, for the Socialist Workers' Party. I think the guy's name was Peter Camillo or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
And Willie Mae Reed was the vice president nominee with this party. And I remember her because I saw her in college. She came and spoke at Wisconsin, where I was going to school. So I decided to vote for them because I figured that vote might mean more to them than it would be to either one of these two parties. But our country was kind of like it was now. It wasn't not so much maybe as blatantly you're on one side of the bridge or on the other, but there was younger people like we either weren't paying much attention to it, or we were wanting to try something new or trying to push new ideas across. And so it was an interesting time in a political sense for that. But I always looked back kind of envious to New Hampshire because of the first in the nation primary and the idea that that any presidential candidate could show up and have a cup of coffee in your living room. I mean, they were just out there and people just banged on doors. And I was living in Wisconsin and we didn't have that at all. But as a journalism major, it was New Hampshire and New Hampshire politics, and particularly the way politics was covered in New Hampshire was a big deal at the college. And I remember a professor holding up copies of the Manchester Union Leader and saying that these guys were very influential, the newspaper, what they were to the voters. And the professor was kind of interested in how they could be kind of pretty blunt about who they were voting for, I mean, who the paper supported. They didn't seem to be as independent as we were supposed to be. And he wasn't, as I remember, the professor was not impressed at all with conservative William or Bill Loeb. Do you guys living here at the time recall that newspaper being particularly powerful back then, maybe more so, obviously, than it is now?
Absolutely. Bill Loeb was known to be a conservative, and he also posted his editorial on the front page. And that was unusual in newspapers at the time. And he was not reticent about speaking his mind. He, kind of like today's administration, he used certain words to describe people. He insulted them sometimes. I mean, it was his point of view and his paper. He could do what he wanted. I remember Lou D'Alessandro calling it Liberal Lou. And Dave Nixon, who was from New Boston, once ran for governor and called him Devious Dave. And names like that. And yeah, he was powerful. It had some influence.
He made friends, but he made a lot of enemies along the way. And people thought the way to get back at him was we aren't going to buy his paper. But you know what? Guess what? He sold a lot of papers. So
it was the only statewide newspaper at the time.
And Nacky Loeb was at his side all the time. And so they're good people, very good people, just very opinionated, and he had a big newspaper to back him up when he wanted to,
Yeah. I remember when I was a senior in high school, and the seniors athletic dinner was at what is now the Historical Society. And our speaker that night was William Loeb, Bill Loeb.
No kidding.
And it was quite interesting. He was not controversial. He was talking to high school athletes, but interesting fellow.
Yeah.
I never had the opportunity to meet him. I worked for Nacky Loeb at one time, and she was a little bit more private about some of her political views, or at least around me she was. And her daughter, I think, one of their daughter was big with therapeutic horse racing here in
Yeah, that
Goffstown
was
at the time.
Edie, the daughter
Yeah.
Edie ran
Edie,
the
yeah.
therapeutic riding. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's funny how, because the more things change, the more they stay the same. Because when I'm looking back into what 76 politics was like here in New Hampshire, there was talk back then again of implementing the state income tax, which you've heard about that from almost every year beyond that. And tensions were kind of hard, but tough back then because property taxes were getting higher and higher, which again seems like something that we hear about today.
Yeah.
Governor Meldon Thompson, he won re-election that in '76 because he was a vocal opponent of new taxes, and he won a re-election over Democrat Harry Spanos back then. And of note, of course, I wasn't living here at the time, but the Secretary of State in 1976 was elected Bill Gardner, and he served in that position up until about 4 years ago. So it was, I think the state back then was pretty red, I guess, conservative, and very interested in, live free and die, kind of like it is nowadays.
Yeah.
And in Goffstown, between 1960 and 1977, the population of the town grew, almost grew by 50%. And by 1976-77, the population was 10,800 people, which is about half of what it is now, I guess. And warrant articles back then, 74, 75, 76, 77, the warrant articles you see in the town reports were all about road maintenance and zoning adjustments to handle this population boom that was banging up the state. And it dominated the town meetings for years and years after that. Do you guys remember how was the political atmosphere? Was it different from our current state of affairs we have now? Were most votes in the State House along party lines like they are now, or was there more partisan stuff? Do you remember?
I don't remember. I do remember it not being nearly as partisan as it is today, and extremely at one end of the political spectrum or the other. But there was a middle ground. Republicans and Democrats worked together, and those were the two major parties. Yes, it was pretty much a red state, but we had different representatives. At one time, we had a Democratic Senator, Tom McIntyre, who got reelected 2 or 3 times. And I think that was one of the benefits of being an incumbent. And people got along. I remember, of course, this would be in the 80s, but Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill being able to work together, two total opposites politically. And in the state, people worked together. Be nice to get back to that.
Now, I didn't move here until later than that, but when I did move here back in the early 80s, it seemed in local town elections or in talking with townspeople at town meetings, it was hard to tell if somebody was a Democrat or Republican.
Yeah.
And then I would vote for somebody and then later find out that they were in a different party that I was in. And it didn't really matter because all the local issues seemed to be, we all felt kind of the same way. It wasn't self-political. But nowadays it seems to me that the town elections are as partisan as the general elections are, the state elections. Was it?
Yeah, I think they had to learn to get along with each.
Yeah.
It's all part of evolving with community government, and you learn. I don't always like what the next guy's doing, but you gotta bend here and there, and you keep your opinions to yourself sometimes, and just move on.
Yeah.
We get so many days on this earth, and let's move on. And I can't worry myself with some of this stuff. That's how I always felt. And
I think we've covered the time frame pretty good to give a sense of what it was like back then, both politically and in town. Jim, was there any attempt to rebuild the bridge?
Well, you bet there was, Mike. And there should be a brand new bridge there right now. It was this close. Okay, within weeks, I think it was 5 weeks after the bridge burned, there was an organization formed. There was the Goffstown Bridge Association. These everybody, they had everybody's support. All the businesses, even the B&M Railroad Company was all on board with this. And so it was spearheaded by the Peabodys, Bill and Pam Peabody. He was the president. She was, I think, the treasurer. And John Peltonen was the secretary, to name a few of the people that were instrumental. And they had dotted the I's and crossed the T's to the extreme. And they seeked out to get a government grant. And to give you an idea how close it was, they were, the bill was passed by both houses of Congress, and the bill was sitting on the desk of President Gerald Ford. And it was a $300,000 check waiting to be delivered to Goffstown to rebuild the bridge. But the president said, he had 7 areas of concern that he wanted answers for. And he gave them all to the town. This is what he wanted. And there was the architectural designs, the firm quotes. He insisted on timely government responses from the town. There was a number of things. And the last one being, he wanted to see the title rights of the abutments of the bridge, which would be in the possession of the B&M Railroad. Well, lo and behold, it couldn't find the title rights for one side of the old bridge. You can't build a new bridge on abutments you don't own. And the B&M Railroad, as much as they were in support of everything, they did not have the title rights for the abutments.
Wow.
One of the abutments, to my understanding. The town had the other. The town just obtained abutment rights in recent years for that other side. This goes to show you.
They don't have the 300,000 sitting in a in a bank for us.
So, although the deadline was, I think, October 4th, it was a deadline, and it just couldn't be done. So there were other alternatives that were seek the government funding, and but nothing 100%. And so, we're not going to have these townspeople paying tax money on a bridge. Sound familiar?
No.
Huh? Well, 50 years later, and I think we get the same problem, That beautiful mill pond is going to disappear because the right, well, I know it all comes down to money. And you have to make your decisions. And right now, they're facing with the same thing. But back then, boy, the opportunity was real close, and they could have had that bridge rebuilt. Right now, from my understanding, the rail trail is in pursuit of $1.25 million walkway, walking bridge, so the bikers can go across. The times change, and so I guess it's a $1 million grant they're after, but they still got to come up with, $250,000. But it'll be beautiful when it's done, when it gets done, if it gets done. But that goes to show you how, in time, the value of things go up. But the opportunity was there. There was one other thing. The abutments was the big thing. There were a few other little issues, to my understanding, but the abutment was the biggest. And so no funding, no bridge, and here it is 50 years later. And but that was the attempt made. It was real close. There have been groups formed since, and it's a lot of money, and it could be done. It could have been done. Right now, I think it's out of the question as far as a full-scale bridge, Walking bridge will be fine. I think it's going to be 120 feet long, 18 feet wide, enough to get bikers both ways and walkers, But you'll you'll have a nice big brook under there to look at.
Yeah, no more words.
Hey, there's no more. There'll be a nice brook to look at. Hey.
Well,
Yeah.
and that's assuming they get the
They
grant.
get the grant, yeah.
Right.
It may be changed now that the pond's going to go away, and you could have a footpath go down in there,
Well, you could just jump over it.
a footpath going down in with a little bridge in there or something. I don't know what's going to happen, but that was the attempt that was made, and and I think we just showed front page news. It was all big news, you know.
1976. You guys remember Peter Frampton's Frampton Comes Alive was released then? You
Yes.
remember that? It was also the year that Howard Hughes, one of the richest men in the world, died. Richest man on the planet. Everyone's favorite quarterback, Peyton Manning, was born that year, along with Reese Witherspoon.
Yeah.
And the thing
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
really got to me, and I don't know if you guys remember, or certainly people probably wouldn't think of it as much today because of computer stuff, but Paul Harvey, he had a show, The Rest of the Story. And
Oh,
it,
yeah.
and it premiered in 1976, and it ran at noon every day for up until the 21st century, anyway. And I remember out doing summer work in Wisconsin in between college classes, and everybody would stop out there. Work would end at noon to listen to this Paul Harvey guy.
Yeah.
Do you guys
he
remember
has some
listening to it?
great
Oh,
stories.
yeah, absolutely.
And now you know the rest of the
story.
story.
Yeah.
That's how he ended everyone. And,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, this year is the semi-quincentennial.
Yes.
I think I got that right.
Yeah.
And back in 1976, we had the bicentennial. What happened in Goffstown that year? What went on? What kind of
You
events
know,
were there?
If you could go back in time and relive the fun they had. I mean, it was 6 months leading up to the actual event. Everything started, I think, in February. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to share with you all the fun they had. So they had 6 months building up to it, and then a big weekend. And there was so much that it was mind-boggling. I said, I'm going to write it down and share it. In 1976, a committee was formed. It was the Goffstown American Revolution Bicentennial Committee. Events were from February to July, including a winter carnival, craft fairs, dances, a bicycle marathon, movie night, Goffstown Days Gone By movie, star call dinners, fireworks, Minutemen appearances, and more. On July 4th weekend, on a Friday morning, it began with an encampment of Dearborn Company on the Common. This is originally a group of New Hampshire men and women who participated in the 1975 Arnold Expedition to Quebec reenactment. So they were a reenactment team. And they set up camp on the Common, tents and fire. It was just the way it was back in the day, a total reenactment. That evening they had the reading of the story Molly Stark writes in her diary, and then an evening of country dancing and celebration. So that was on Friday. Saturday morning, the Dearborn Company, that some slept overnight, they raised the flag on the Common. They fired the cannon and they rang the bells. Grand Parade started at 10 a.m. We had a lot of pictures of the Grand Parade as it marched down North Mass and made its way to Barnett's Playground. Speaking of Barnett's Playground, right here, we had a big chicken barbecue. Hundreds attended the barbecue at the Barnett Playground. Later festivities included presentations, band music, and a rowing of the George Washington across the Delaware on Glen Lake. They purposely arranged this so they could bring a supply of fireworks out to the island, where fireworks were blasted and demonstrated throughout the evening. They all, the Goffstown High School band played, and the barbecue was enjoyed at Barnard's Playground that day. So a lot went on Saturday, but they weren't done yet. And Sunday rolled around, the festivities continued at Barnard's Playground, including a tennis tournament. Presentations were awarded. The high school band once again appeared. There was a nationwide bell ringing at 2 p.m. And that was at 2 p.m., everybody within the nation rang the bell at the same time, 2 p.m. This is symbolizing the signing of the Declaration of Independence. The Goffstown Historical Society's Heritage Quilt was presented. And it's on display to this day at the Goffstown Historical Society. A time capsule was buried at the Goffstown Cemetery. And
Not a person.
and I know where it is.
Oh, yeah?
Oh. Yeah, I'm not telling. That's keeping that a secret.
When is that to be opened?
It will be unearthed in 100 years. So we'll see you guys in 2076. Sound like fun?
Sounds like
Make
fun.
sure to tell your kids' kids, okay? So that will happen in 2076. So also making multiple appearances throughout the weekend were the 37 Minutemen of Goffstown. And these were young boys dressed up in military attire. And they represented the 37 soldiers from Goffstown who fought at the Bunker Hill, in Bunker Hill on that day. So they were well represented, those 37 soldiers. And along the way, the Bicentennial Heritage Committee had set up multiple displays throughout the town. You know, like reenactment of oxen pulling and things that went on, including a shotgun wedding at the courthouse. So that was the laugh of the weekend.
Yeah.
And the actual, they showed a shotgun reenactment of a shotgun wedding in the Goffstown courthouse. So they had it was a grand weekend of excitement, and I hope they say the directions and the advice is in writing for the next one. So 2076, they'll have the rule, what needs to be done and how to improve upon this. So it's really exciting. That's exactly what went on.
I remember feeling very patriotic during that 4th of July, summer '76,
Yeah.
and learned a lot. It was definitely a 4th of July unlike any other.
Yeah.
I don't
Do you
know if
remember,
this-
Mike, all the fire hydrants were painted red, white, and
absolutely.
blue?
Yep.
And it was really a symbol of our country celebrating a great moment in time. And that really was. And the banners that went across the road.
You guys painted the fire hydrant, because they did that. My mother painted the fire hydrants in Clintonville, Wisconsin then. I just thought it was,
Thought it was just you guys.
Midwestern farmers were doing it. No,
Yeah.
across the country.
No.
Everything was red, white, and blue. Huh?
You bet.
Yeah.
Yeah. You bet.
Well, we still got one more thing we want to do. We want
What's
to find
that?
out. We want to find out who started this fire,
Or what?
or how it started. But before we do that, I'd like to take a quick second and look at what the crime was like back in 1976. In Goffstown, there were 873 arrests for motor vehicle violations and 137 for criminal offenses. Interestingly enough, nearly 50% of those arrested were under the age of 22, probably your guys' friends. And
Yeah.
interesting enough, too, in the 70s, it was a big bike time.
Yeah.
So the town report, there were 31 bikes valued at $2,336 were stolen in Goffstown in 1976.
Almost the price of a current bike.
Yeah. You get one.
Yeah, and national attention was concerned with some big-time crooks, too, or not crooks, but criminals. The Son of Sam killings was going on during that time. and serial murders by Ted Bundy, if you remember him, were going on at that time as well. And in California, they had the Gypsy Hill killer,
No kidding.
if you can remember back that. So who do you think was responsible for starting this Goffstown Railroad?
Well, through the
covered bridge
years, there have been many theories
Mm-hmm.
and accusations, and it's hard to say for sure. We have a photo on our screen right now. This was one of the prime suspects, a convict, a released convict from the Hillsborough County Farm,
Uh-huh.
had been arrested in recent weeks for starting the fire of the chicken house at the county farm. And to make his matters even worse, he was cited on Mill Street the morning of the fire.
Oh,
So he was a prime suspect. Investigations were done, and everything. He was released. He was not did not get arrested for the crime, and they're always been pointing at arsons. I've always been. It's a speculation. About 6 months ago, I was told a story that from a very reliable source, and it's not a secondhand story.
Okay.
It's a first-hand account. And my nephew, Joseph Boschman, and my sister-in-law, his mother, Kate Boschman, were both parked at the Goffstown True Value on Main Street. That's where they were parked right there. And they came out of the hardware store, and as they got in the car, they looked over, and there were several teenagers running out of the train trestle, screaming, "Fire, fire." And the smoke was starting. It was light, but it was there.
Mm-hmm.
They immediately ran across the street to the Goffstown Superette, the little market. Who was the owner then, Mike?
Either Charest, Mr. Charest, or Morgan.
Morgan was earlier.
Yeah.
He was right there at the counter, and they said, "We need a fire extinguisher. Help, we need a fire extinguisher." Well, he stepped out of the store and looked over and said, "No way, you're not going over there. Fire department's right here. We're calling the fire department." And they felt if they had taken that fire, if they'd had a fire extinguisher right there, they could have got over there and put the fire out. By the time the fire trucks arrived, which seemed like forever, he said, the flames were starting to show. The smoke was bellowing out, and the flames were starting to show. There's no way you were putting that fire out. And to avoid the jam, they knew what was about to happen. They got in their car and they scooted across the bridge and headed out of town towards their home. But to this day, they saw what they saw. Now, I really truly believe these young kids were not intentionally trying to start the bridge on fire as an arson might. This is something that got out of hand. Now, they might have been smoking a cigarette, because that's what a lot of kids did in there. Nobody could see you, and they threw it down, and it ignited, and it created flames, and they knew they couldn't put them out. I'm hoping one of those kids is watching this show tonight, and have it in your heart to put this to rest for once. Come and see me at the Historical Society, and you know what? It's all over and done with, but it would be interesting to know. I personally, I did some things in my day that I was ashamed of and I wish I hadn't done. Mm-hmm. And this might be one of them for them, but get it off your chest. Because imagine you've been living with it for 50 years. Mm-hmm. So what an opportunity right here for one of you to step up and let's clear the air and nothing's going to happen to them. But
there's no statute of limitations on, right?
Exactly,
I would think.
not on something like that.
Yeah.
But But that's what I believe, and I think in my mind I've solved the mystery, and now you've heard
That's the rest of the story.
That's about it.
That's it. Perfect.
Well, Jim, again, thank you. What a great presentation. Able to cover the Covered Bridge fire and the bicentennial and the political and social environment at the time.
Yeah.
I hope people enjoyed that, and till next time, goodbye.
Good night.
Good night.